Welcome to LHC Unplugged. I'm Sarah Harrington. I'm the Director of Communications here at LongHillChapel, and I have our lead pastor, Michael Hoddy, and our associate pastor, Joey Monteleone.
Hello, Sarah.
Hello, guys.
Hi,
How
Sarah.
are we today?
I'm trying to become more completely unhinged every time I say hello.
Doing great.
I think it's great.
I like how you say my last name with the little jingle.
Very fancy.
Yeah, it's got a song to it.
Kind of musical, which fits you.
I like
Yeah.
that. No, it works.
I'm worshiping.
Wow.
Speaking of worship, my YouTube algorithm now is all either it's been listening to us every time we podcast and talk about sports because I'm not a sports person, but every time the first thing that pops up is baseball pitchers who throw these ungodly fast 99-mile-an-hour fastballs. And the batter hits it, but then the pitcher catches it right away. And I am dumbfounded at how you react to that.
Baseball nerd here, and
There
a
we go.
son who's a pitcher. The exit velocity is fast. That's like 100 miles an hour
Yeah,
plus.
it's insane.
And, you're getting the, whatever it is, 60 feet back to the mound.
And a lot of these guys are not even conscious that they did it.
Well, you can't be conscious when you do it. You also don't want to get hit in the head with that thing.
Yeah.
So what's the YouTube algorithm? I think let's back up. Let's start there.
If you're listening to a podcast, number one, you know what a YouTube algorithm is. But for
This is
those of
true.
you who randomly don't, it is the rhythm and rate of which content and material gets pushed your way based on your likes, preferences, and desires.
It's true that if you showed up here, you've probably already gotten past that.
This is
in life.
inside baseball.
Yeah.
Hey, back to baseball.
I see what you did there.
What were you watching that now your algorithm has changed to this? Was it anything good? Because there's been some good baseball stories that have been happening. There's the College World Series going on. There's a lot going on.
I think this was more an accidental oops. This was not like,
I
I
was
was
trying to,
searching it
like,
out.
boost you up
and then
there.
once it started going, it's like this snowball effect where it just gives you more and more and more. And I'm just addicted to how these guys do this. But it's better than the alternative, which my previous algorithm was people who get pulled over by cops who start filming and you kind of just let it play out until the sergeant gets called and it's like, oh, justice is coming. Here we go.
Yeah, I had a police chases period where
nice.
it was all police chases.
What are you guys watching that leads to things like this?
Yeah, Sarah's horrified.
What is your algorithm?
I'm interested.
What shows up for you?
Unicorns and rainbows, Pastor Joey.
Literally?
Like actual ones?
No, there's a lot of sports on there. There's a lot of church, faith-based stuff on there because you guys also share a lot of that stuff with me.
That's my Instagram. My Instagram is all church pastors that I follow. It's content stuff of like, hey, post this and do that and all of that. But YouTube is where it just goes off the rails.
So I have my younger son is really into steam trains, so I have a lot of steam train related content. But the other thing is I do not like to be pigeonholed by the robots. I do not. It bothers me when they're like, I see who you are. You really like this. Here's some more. So what I started doing is I started clicking on random things.
Okay.
And following a few pages that are completely not what I would do. So I actually started clicking on chicken coop supplies.
Okay.
And so I discovered that you can get a heated chicken perch, which you might know because you have chickens.
I know all about this.
Did you know that my town just passed an ordinance that you cannot have more than 4 chickens
That is
on your
just-
property? And there's like a whole 2 paragraphs of like municipal legalese, like whereas something about chickens. And
This isn't
it's
1800s
the-
England. What
it's
is
the
this?
current.
Do you need a permit for something like that?
Let's not talk about
You don't
it.
need a permit, but if you go more than 4 chickens, you're going to get a
Well, at least-
ticket
at
or a
least in your-
ticket.
Or at least in your town.
Yeah, in my town. So we've been going off about that. But so that I had that for a while and I've learned all about like chicken supplies.
Yep.
But recently, again, I was getting annoyed that the robots were trying to pigeonhole me. So I joined 2 Facebook groups. I joined Guinea Pig Lovers and All About Squirrels.
Because you have a guinea pig?
No.
Or- no, just...
Nope.
Okay.
Squirrels exist and I'm aware of their existence. I don't care that much. There are people who really care about the existence of squirrels.
Interesting.
There's all sorts of squirrel related controversies that break out and people will take pictures of squirrels or like, is something wrong with the squirrel? Oh, look at the squirrel. It's so cute. And so that has just completely upset the algorithm and I love it.
Yep. You're beating the system.
That's what I'm doing.
I like it.
I'm staying
Guinea
ahead of the
pigs and
man.
squirrels.
Yes.
I love that. For
All
us.
about squirrels.
All about squirrels. So facts about squirrels.
There's not a lot of facts happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, unfiltered emotions and feelings when it comes to the existence of squirrels.
What do you think about the rumor? And I'm going to call it a rumor because I don't know if this is a fact, but the rumor that if a squirrel is racing across the road,
I'll just spike the brakes. That's all you can do. It's going to go back.
Yeah, but like if you spike the brakes, the rumor is that it has timed how much space it needs to be able to get across. So don't hit the brakes because it's banking on you not stopping.
Have you ever seen the size of a squirrel's head?
I have.
Do you know how much processing power there is inside that
Probably
small
not much.
skull? Not a lot. And have you ever tested your theory?
Oh, yeah.
How many squirrels
Always
have
hit
you killed?
him. I always hit him when I stop.
Well, then maybe
No.
it's not working. So
Maybe it's not me.
what I do is I'll just be driving along and the squirrel comes out. I'm like, that squirrel's going to run out. He's either going to freeze or he's going to come back. And so I just spike the brakes or I swerve around the squirrel. And I have a very low squirrel mortality rate.
Well, speaking of spiking the brakes and
checks.
swerving,
No checks on your dashboard.
we're now going to get into our topic today.
Wow, what a swerve.
What a swerve. Cynicism.
All about squirrels.
Let's talk about cynicism. So give me, first of all, what's the difference between having discernment and being cynical?
I'm not sure there's a line, and I think it's easy to call one the other. And I speak, just full disclosure, as a person who really struggles to be cynical. I'm sarcastic and occasionally funny, but it's easy for that to really just kind of go over into cynicism. Discernment is when you don't just go through life. You go through life eyes wide open. There's this old Soviet Russian proverb that I think Ronald Reagan quoted back in the arms control days of the 1980s. I won't do the Russian, but it basically means trust but verify. And it's this whole thing that you're supposed to end up with trust in relationships, but you're also not just going through it with your eyes closed. You're checking to see what's true. And that's just a wise way to live. We ought to do that. The scriptures actually tell us to do that, to test the spirits. So there's a good thing with discernment. It's discerning what's true, what's not, what's true, what's false. The fact that there is more than meets the eye very often going on in the things that have our hearts. And I think the thing that is important with discernment is to realize it starts with us. My favorite bumper sticker verse that's not on a bumper sticker that should be on a bookmark with like a drawing of a kitten is from Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. It says, the human heart is deceitful above all things and without cure. So it's a terminal condition. Who can understand it? So there's this thing about us that we are selling ourselves things that are half true. It doesn't say the human heart lies. It says the human heart's deceitful. And so we're taking just enough truth and wrapping around this thing that's not true. It's just part of who we are. There are willful versions of it, but it's just part of the human condition. And we'll never be able to figure it out. We can never outsmart it. We can never out Bible study it because, as it says at the end of the verse, no one understands it. And so we have to start with discernment. And discernment is really looking at things with more objectivity than we would have within ourselves. That's true about us, but it's true about the other people around us. But it's easy for that to go over a line into cynicism, which is where we really almost disarm the possibility of hope and the possibility of trust. We do it preemptively. I think the reason, just speaking for myself, that I struggle with it is a surefire way to avoid being hurt. It's just if you go there and you preempt with pessimism or you preempt with sarcastic humor, in my case, it avoids you opening yourself up to the possibility that you'll be disappointed or that you'll be hurt. And that can poison relationships. It can poison actually the fact that we as a people, the scriptures talk about this in our series. We talked about it in previous weeks, that we are called to be people of hope and that hope doesn't come to us the way we expect. But even in circumstances, even in disappointment, even in suffering, even in frustration, God meets us with hope and he actually can build something from those circumstances, even from those disappointments that doesn't get built any other way. But if we give in to just cynicism and kind of just not leaning into the process of what God might be doing, we miss that. I think the thing that is interesting, though, about cynicism is it's actually different than apathy. You know, cynicism is a sign that you haven't given up hope yet because you still care enough to engage. Apathy is just like, I don't care. And that's something I've always thought about. It's a scale that we're on, you know, it's degrees. And we can be a little more, a little less, but it's different than just kind of falling off and saying, oh, I don't care, you know, kind of being apathetic or nihilistic. And that gives us a place to start. And I think very often it's just becoming honest with yourself about where you are and the fact that this thing that we can call discernment has become something more than that.
I like how you worded it, that both of them kind of see problems. Like discernment recognizes a problem, cynicism recognizes a problem. One has determined an outcome. One has determined that there's nothing more I can do here. I've given up. And that can lead to apathy, absolutely, when you do it often enough and loud enough. Spiritually speaking, you've decided that God can't do anything with this either. And so that's an even more dangerous place, because now you're sitting in the seat of God and what he can and most likely wants to do in this opportunity for you. What's challenging, and what I've noticed a lot in my own life and in the lives of people I've come in contact with, is that we staple discernment on cynicism and we call one the other.
Yes.
But the problem with that is that you're over spiritualizing your unbelief. You have decided that, okay, I'm not going to believe God can't do anything with this, and therefore I'll just call it discernment. When that is not the call of the believer, that's not the call of the hope that we have in God. And I think we can, like you said with the Jeremiah passage, that's where it becomes deceitful, because we actually think we're doing a good thing and we're not. We're engaging in this form of disbelief, not only in God, in situations, in people. It's a very slippery slope. And then you develop this callous heart towards what God wants to do in your life and the lives of those around you and how he wants to use you. And so we just have to be very aware of the slippery slope, the deceptive nature of calling one the other.
What do you think, and I don't know if dangerous is the right word to use, but what do you think is worse, being apathetic or being cynical?
I think you had written something about this, Sarah, in the kind of our preparations for this, where you talked about cynicism as wounded hope. And I think apathy is dangerous. As pastors, we interact a lot with married couples, and married couples fight and they have arguments, and sometimes those go in toxic directions. And sometimes that builds up the snowball effect of something that is really a big deal that needs to be dealt with, a big issue. But all sorts of psychologists kind of say the same thing, and this has been my experience, is if you find a relationship where it's gotten to apathy, it's over. There's just nothing to build with. And I think that's the whole thing with apathy, is there's nothing to work with. And cynicism as wounded hope, it means there's still hope there. The challenge, though, with that is it can't stay that way. It goes in a direction. It's kind of like if I have a significant wound or a cut or something like that, or a broken arm, it can heal, but if it's left unattended, it won't heal, and it'll actually create a much bigger problem in the long run. That's why we have to kind of turn and pay attention to it. Cynicism is, in a way, it's self-protective. It's preempting you from being disappointed or let down or hurt or whatever. But in our bid to be self-protective, we actually open ourselves up to really one of the greatest possible dangers to our souls, which is apathy. And so we're trying to be self-protective, but we're actually inviting in the very thing that will, I don't want to say destroy us, but will lead us to a place where there's nothing left to build with.
The imagery that came to mind was somebody in a hospital, and they've been in an accident, and that's, it's a long road to recovery. Which approach is going to lead to more healing? The person who doesn't believe they can be healed, or the person who doesn't think that it's going to be easy? You can do a lot more with the person who doesn't think that it's going to be easy, because you can actually work on that mindset. You can change that. But if you've come to the conclusion that this is over, that's a lot harder of a position to work with. And when it comes to our spirituality, when it comes to the relationships of our lives that are strenuous, when it comes to what we believe God can do, if we've already decided that outcome, and we have a posture of that where we get to decide what God can and can't do, it's actually very similar to Genesis 18, where God comes to Abram and Sarah and says, you're going to have a baby. And she's like, that's not going to happen. And God actually calls that out. God's like, why did you laugh? He says that. And she actually backs up and she's like, I didn't laugh. And she's very nervous about it. I think a lot of us, if we got called on our cynicism, we'd do the same thing. Mm-hmm. We would go, oh, no, I really believe it. Yeah, but you're not acting as though you do. And I think there's a fine line between cynicism and apathy, and it really does come down to your action. What are you willing to engage with in this faith, regardless of the past hurt, regardless of the circumstance and the experience? Because I think that's the question for everybody. Am I engaging in cynicism, or is it apathy? Well, what are you willing to do?
Yeah. And there's the interesting thing with that story in Genesis 18 is that that's not just dismissiveness on Sarah's part. This was really the hope of many years that they would have a child, that they'd have an heir. And I know that's a very real reality for some folks who may even be listening to this, that's been the hope. And, the years tick by and the circumstances seem like they're going to be the same. And at some point, it's not that you lacked hope. It's not that you went into this in unbelief, but it got itself there. And I wonder in that passage, God does some interesting stuff there because he doesn't condemn her, he doesn't judge, he doesn't, there's no fire and brimstone. There's none of that maybe you would expect from unbelief.
In fact, he follows through.
Yeah, there's grace. And he says, I'm going to prove who I am. I'm going to show you and you're going to have a son. And I wonder if her laughing was even conscious. She says, I did not laugh. She's either lying to God, it's possible, or it's just this reaction. It's almost like a reflex that happens. And I think self-protection, going back, I'm going to tie your baseball algorithm in.
The same thing.
When a pitcher puts their hand up to catch that ball, it's like I catch from my son who's a pitcher. He throws hard and he doesn't throw 99 miles an hour yet. When that ball's coming back, there's almost this reflex and your hand kind of knows where to go, because if it didn't, you'd be in for a world of hurt. Right. And I think self-protection, especially if we practice it, if we do it over and over again, it becomes a reflex. And then if we're going to, if we're going to embrace God's way and his healing in that, we almost have to walk back out of that reflex.
I also think with Sarah's like most of us, where you have past experience, you're waiting. I think we all walk through that. So what do you say to someone that's had past experiences that has made them cynical?
If you read in the passage, there's an interesting moment where Sarah does interact with God and she says, I am old and worn out. And she looks at herself that way. And God responds in that, but he leaves the word worn out. So he recognizes the fact that she's old. He doesn't dismiss that, but he changes the filter on how she sees herself. And when you ask that question, how do you help somebody walk through? We can't dismiss the circumstances that people have walked through. Absolutely not. We're not going to gaslight ourselves. We're not going to pretend that bad things are good and that these things don't matter. Absolutely. Pain is real. Hurt is present, constant in this world. But I think there's an opportunity for the people of God to start with ourselves and then to start with other people out of that to help reframe how we see ourselves. Because often, like we said, the heart's deceitfully wicked. The self-talk with believers is radically out of line with how God sees us. There's a real opportunity to start speaking truth and to really have mentor relationships with people who are older and wiser and who have been through this a little bit longer than we have, to call out, maybe I'm not seeing this correctly. Maybe I don't understand this. How do you see this? If we're the experts of our own experience, we will always trend towards our own perception. And these hurts really are a lens. They filter how we see these things. And it's so interesting that this is not a new problem. This isn't a 2026 phenomena. This is something Sarah's walking through. She went through a lot. There's such a laundry list for Sarah. You really get a heart for her, where the promise was made to Abram, and she's kind of the way this promise is going to happen, that they're going to have kids. Okay, well, Abram doesn't do that by himself. Right. So she's a part of this, and she goes on this journey. They leave their land. She gets lied about twice that she's not his wife. And she's kind of dismissed. She's like the tag along in this process. And then she tries to own the fact that she can't give him children and fulfill this promise. So she gets her slave woman to have a child with Abram. And now there's this other son, and that rejection, that feeling is just heartbreaking. And so, yeah, I get why she left. And I think as you go through life, you have to sit down and understand people's stories. You can't just be like, well, suck it up, because the Bible says, count it all joy when you experience difficulty. No, there's like real pain. And until we're willing to engage with that, embrace that, and then walk through it with truth, yeah, these things will filter how we see ourselves and how we think God sees us.
And this is, as a preacher, and Joey, you and I both are that, one of the hardest things for me to do is to stand in front of the church and try to give a prescription for what people ought to do, and also look in the faces of people and know all of their stories, know what they're going through, know what they're facing. And that's changed kind of how, hopefully, I try to approach that, which is, I believe, just like we said, that cynicism is wounded hope. There's still hope there. Like, one of the things we get to do is to offer the hope of Jesus, balanced in the tension that we may not understand how that works and how we're going to see it and when we're going to see it, and even sometimes if we're going to see it in our time. I think a great first step is to just name it, is to just start where you are. I think it's easy for us to heap condemnation on our cynicism once we become aware that that's what we're doing, and just be like, well, I can't, God doesn't want me to be this way. He wants me to, be floating on a cloud, playing a harp where everything is easy and joy, and there's kittens and bunny rabbits and just this like happy
your
thing.
Algorithm.
Yes, your unicorns, I guess.
Unicorns and rainbows.
And that's just not most of our lived reality. And the thing, again, that we can do with God is we can actually be honest about that because he knows. Mm-hmm. And what we're actually doing is we're bringing ourselves back into alignment with truth.
Yeah.
And starting there and just starting and saying, God, this is where I am. This is what I feel. This is what I've seen. This is what I've experienced. This is why it's hard for me to believe. It's why it's hard for me to have hope. And you just sit there, to stay there, not to do that on the way to something else. But the thing I always believe that God does is he meets us where we are, but he never leaves us there. Yeah. And all we can do, though, is start where we are. We can't, like you said, gaslight ourselves and just try to drag ourselves away from that moment. But, when we become honest, I think there's a way God meets us in a way that only he can, because suddenly we've become human. There's that word humble. We see it in 1 Peter chapter 5, where it says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God and he'll lift you up in due time. And, we think of humility, and sometimes Christians do this, as just this like self-effacing thing. Well, I'm not much, I'm worthless, I have nothing to offer. And that's not really what the word means. It means to become human. You can see the connection of those two words. And it's reconnecting yourself with the reality of where you are and who you are and the questions you have and the hurts that you've experienced and the disappointments. And I can only think someone like Sarah in the story that you recounted over all those years, even with a promise from God all those years and not seeing it and trying to make it happen and trying to continue to have faith and continue to follow and to get up and go to the next place and all of the things that Sarah did, that it's absolutely understandable that she would respond the way that she did.
And I think, too, as we do that, we all have a version of this. I don't think there's a non-cynical person in the world. There's some level of it. Some have it a little bit more under control. Some are battling it a little bit more. But as we do this more, as we engage with our humanity and we bring that honesty to God, the more you do it, it's kind of like a rep, the better you'll get at it. I think there's an outflow nature of it. One of the shows I've been watching recently is called Band of Brothers. It's the HBO show that documents this platoon right outside of D-Day. And the horrors of war are just so beautifully crafted and captured in this show. But one of the things that happens is when they are on retreat and somebody gets shot, someone comes back and says, nope, you can't stay here. And they pick him up and they carry him off. And it's such beautiful imagery of what the church should be. Those wounds are moments of cynicism. And we can look around and say, okay, you're cynical and your cynicism is off the chart. Or we can say, nope, can't stay there. And let me help you. That's really where the body becomes something more. It becomes the family that God intended it always to be.
You've put your finger on something that's important. So if we're starting with the truth of where we are before God, it's the reality that we, I think, have a very hard time walking ourselves out of this. I'll speak for myself. I'm probably not going to be like, let's be hopeful. Now I'm hopeful. All about pray. Squirrels. But when there's somebody else who reflects truth, who allows me to see beauty, who gives a different perspective, who opens a window into something else in the world, that is the thing that I believe changes everything. And we all ought to have those kind of people in our lives. And it is one of the great things about a healthy local church. The first thing that Satan will try to do to us is isolate us and then get us to believe all of the things that we are experiencing and feeling at the moment. And other people and a faith community just has this uncanny way of reconnecting us with the hope of God and what's true.
Well, thanks so much for listening to LHC Unplugged. As a reminder, we gather on Sundays at 10:15, both in person on Shumpike Road in Chatham, New Jersey, and online at lhcnj.net. And if you have a question for our pastors to answer, please send it in to us. And you can do that by emailing it to us at questions@lhcnj.net. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to having you next time.